What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Today we're going to be breaking down the game between the Tampa Bay Vipers at the Seattle Dragons for Week 2, looking at all those fantasy football start sets, giving you guys a game preview of how we expect this game to go down. But hey, if you're looking for XFL fantasy content, XFL news posted daily, click that like and subscribe button. We'll be posting stuff throughout the entire season, so make sure you're in on that. Anyway, I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get started right now. Alright guys, as I said, we're breaking down the Vipers and Dragons. This game is going to be very interesting. I love how all of the games on this week's slate ended up falling. You have both of the teams that won last week. They're all going to be playing each other, and all the teams that lost last week are playing each other. So there's only going to be 2 winless teams and 2 undefeated teams after week 2. Should give us a really good ability to give a better assessment of how we feel about these teams going forward with multiple data points. Now, this game is in Seattle, but the Vipers are actually favored to win by 3 right now. I do have to remind you that the Vipers were favored to win last week. I liked the New York Guardians to win, and they definitely exceeded my expectations there. This one has the lowest over-under on the week, 44.5. That is significantly dropped from all of the games last week. Vegas is learning their lesson quickly that offenses in this league are still trying to get things figured out, still trying to gel. Not nearly as many points scored last week as they were expecting. So look for that trend to continue until these offenses start to figure things out and click a little bit better. So with them favored to win by 3, that puts the implied point total right around 24-21-ish. For the Vipers in this one, and overall, if I had to put money on this one, I think the Dragons are still going to win. I do think the Vipers are a much better team than what we saw last week. They got to the red zone 4 times and only walked away with 3 points, but they still have a lot of offensive identity to figure out, and their defense leaves a lot to be desired. The Dragons actually played pretty admirably considering how well the defenders played, so I like for Seattle to win this one at home, but we'll see how that ends up turning out. Now, let's break down these different teams and look at the fantasy options here. Let's start with the Vipers since they are the away team. Now, there's already a quarterback controversy brewing in Tampa. It didn't take very long. Aaron Murray looked really up and down last week, had a decent amount of passing yards, but no touchdowns, multiple interceptions. This is very similar to how he looked in the AAF, and is now dealing with a foot injury, so we're not even sure if he's going to be able to play this week at this point in the week. Now, Quinton Flowers came in last week and gave this offense some life, but they didn't really give him too much usage. I don't know if this is going to become the mainstay. They have not made any official announcement one way or another. It's looking like they're leaning towards playing Murray again, unless, of course, Murray doesn't play. So we'll definitely have to keep our ear to the ground until we get some official news. But if Murray gets the start, I would definitely try to find a better option here. Just the fact that Flowers is still there, and we know that he's going to be part of the game plan, especially after how he played so well last week. So even if Murray is playing, Flowers could still steal some of his volume and some of his red zone work, which would be very disappointing to say the least. But if Flowers ends up getting the start and Murray doesn't play, he would be a top 6 option. All right, let's jump down to the running backs. Now, Devian Smith was a bright spot for this team last week that desperately needed some life. 16 carries for 79 yards with a 4.9 per carry average. That was really good on the week. The Dragons were very good against the run in week 1. Have to definitely keep that in mind. They held Jarrell Presley to 31 yards, and I think Daniel Pumphrey had like 4 yards, something like that. But I'm not sure you can bench Smith or even consider benching him after the for one, how poorly running backs across the XFL performed, but 2, just how well Devian Smith produced last week. This is also more of a 2-headed backfield, unless you count Quinton Flowers as part of that backfield as well, with Smith seeing the majority of the work, so he's going to be one of your closer bell cow running backs in the XFL. You're definitely going to be starting him this week. All right, looking at the wide receivers, Daniel Williams was honestly the biggest surprise for me of week 1. He looked absolutely great out there. And it was a shame he wasn't able to get into the end zone in the 4th quarter. Would have had an even more dominant day, but he had one drop that I bet he wishes he had back. But other than that, he looked phenomenal. Jalen Tolliver and Reese Horn saw a decent amount of targets as well, but didn't really do too much with them. Whereas we saw Daniel Williams was basically stiff-arming people and throwing them to the ground. So I really like Daniel Williams this week. I'm probably not going to start anyone else just because There's still a lot of other names like Shontavis Jones didn't see any targets last week, but he could be more involved this week. So outside of Daniel Williams, I'm still going to kind of play a wait-and-see role and see how this offense shakes out, who ends up being the quarterback here. However, I will start Nick Truesdale. He did have a fumble last week, and I'm sure he wishes he had back, but he made some terrific athletic plays, took a few big hits, and was still able to maintain the ball. He also saw 6 targets in total, which I think tied for across the league with, I think 3 tight ends had 6 targets, and you should continue to see a very high volume target share if you were able to acquire him this week after him not doing that well. From a fantasy production standpoint, I still think Nick Truesdale is going to be the leading tight end in fantasy scoring this week or this year, probably this week as well. So definitely start Nick Truesdale. All right, looking at the defense, this will be an interesting game to forecast for defense because, as we'll get to in a second, but we've already mentioned for the Vipers, we don't really know who the starting quarterback is going to be for each team as of this point in the week. But last week, this defense left a lot to be desired. We projected them to be one of the worst defenses before the season started, and we appear to be pretty spot on about that. But if Silvers isn't healthy, this could be a more interesting game for the defense. But still, assuming we get Silvers playing and hopefully Flowers, but maybe Murray on the Tampa Bay side, I like for this game to be a little bit more higher scoring. The under really dipped down. I mean, for them to not hit 44 would have to be a pretty putrid offensive show. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit the over in this game. So I'd probably try to find a different defense if I could. I think I had the Vipers ranked as number 6 on the week. All right, jumping over to the Dragons. Now, Brandon Silvers was up and down last week. 3 touchdowns, looked really good, but then he had 2 interceptions. I think he showed a decent bit of promise, but he is dealing with an ankle injury. For those of you that watched the game, near the end of the game, he had to leave on the last drive because he rolled his ankle. If he can't go, then BJ Daniels would get the start. And then BJ Daniels almost won the job outright in training camp, so I don't know how much of a skill gap there will be in terms of offensive production if they move from Brandon Silvers to BJ Daniels. So from a fantasy angle, I'm not really worried. I just want to know who the starter is so I know who to play if I have to play a Seattle quarterback. Jumping to the running backs, this was a 3-headed monster last week. Something that we're seeing a bit more across the league, which is pretty annoying for fantasy, I have to admit, but I think we got a little bit of clarity here. Farrow looks to be the most explosive and was also involved as a receiver, while I think Trey Williams basically just straight up outplayed Jaquan Gardner. Also need to remember that Jaquan Gardner fumbled near the end of the game and basically lost the game for the Dragons. They were getting ready to score and make it a 1-possession game, and he basically just fumbled the ball away. And it was a really bad play. I'm good with starting either Farrow or Williams if he need to start this week, but I'll wait and see on Gardner for now until we see if he can pick back up from where he left off last week, which was not very good. All right, jumping over to the receivers, Austin Proehl was the most dominant and explosive receiver on this team and almost the entire XFL. Way too hard to ignore what he did last week. If you picked him up on the waivers this week, because that's where he probably was for you, because he wasn't a big name heading into week 1. It's way too hard to ignore what he did and not play him, so he remains a top play this week. And then no one else really stood out on this team in terms of receivers. Keenan Reynolds and Dantes Bird did okay, but nothing spectacular. They didn't really seem to bring about a lot of attention to them. And maybe now that Austin Proehl was broken out, they'll focus more on shutting him down this week. So we'll see how it ends up playing out, but I'd play Proehl and no one else. Also need to note that S.J. Green from the CFL was signed this week, so that would definitely make things a little bit interesting here going forward. I definitely wouldn't start him this week. I don't even know if he's going to play this week, just considering how quick of a turnaround time that would be, but definitely a name to keep in mind here and pay attention to as we go on. Also looks like Quinton Williams is still dealing with that quad injury. He was a do not practice today. I don't expect him to play, so start Proehl and wait and see on everybody else. All right, on the tight end side, both Ben Johnson and Cam Clear are both hurt. I think they're both going to miss this week. So this will be a 2-man show with Colin Jeter and Evan Rodriguez. I personally still think that Evan Rodriguez is the more athletic option, but last week they both kind of saw, I think Evan Rodriguez had 1 target and Colin Jeter, I believe, had 2. So until we see either guy actually get a decent amount of target share, I wouldn't recommend starting either of them. Jumping over to the defense now, the Dragons defense actually played pretty admirably last week, especially against the run. Playing the defenders pretty tough. They gave up some big plays in the passing game, but they would definitely be tested on the run side of the ball this week against Debian Smith and against a team that got to the red zone 4 times last week. Got to remember that. So we'll see if the Dragons can replicate what the New York Guardians did in their home opener, but I'm not banking on it. I think they still have an okay performance overall, but I don't have them inside my top 4. All right, guys. Well, overall, like I said, I think the Dragons will end up winning this one. I like this one to actually hit the over by a little bit. Probably not by too much. I wouldn't be surprised if this game came pretty close to 50 points overall. I think there would be a decent amount of offensive scoring in this one. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're looking for fantasy content, waiver reports, trade requests, rankings, all that stuff, click the link in the description or go to fantasyaddictionnetwork.com. You can access all that for free. And again, if you like what you saw here, click that like and subscribe button. We'll be posting stuff throughout the XFL season. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.